What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of today's discussion in the comment section below. If you're currently listening to us on iTunes or Spotify or any other podcast company, please make sure you leave us a detailed review and a 5-star rating. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living in a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit-down video. Also, if you enjoy cigars, please make sure you support our show and grab a couple of sit-down cigars available from Pravada Cigar Club. The link to buy is in the description and audio of this video. Before we get into today's episode, I want to thank everybody. This is episode 162 of the podcast, and I'm your host, Jeff Nadu. Recently on YouTube, we passed 75,000 subscribers, and I couldn't have done it without you. We have had such a great time over the years recording this show. We have built up communities on the podcast side, the video side, even on places like TikTok, where we have over 191,000 subscribers. It has been quite the ride here, and I can't do it without any of you. I appreciate all you watching, and I hope you continue and enjoy what we're doing here. Today, it is a fun show, and I know a lot of you look forward to this show. We have done it every year since we started this show. We did it in 2021. We did it in 2022. We did it last year in 2023 with Scott Bernstein, and we're back first week of June as we kind of get to the slow period of the year. Summer is pretty much here, right? The dog days of summer are coming, and I figured it's a great time to do a little State of the Union. Where is the Mafia in 2024? And I know a lot of people, as I said, like this show. Essentially, what we do here is we go through each active city currently. We kind of try to label who's on the hierarchy of these families. And in today's society in 2024, it's not exactly easy. Also kind of discuss families that I think are very weak towards the end. And I'll even maybe at the end talk about some of the other cities and kind of where they are. But this is a good episode. It's not an exact science. A lot of this stuff is gained through court reports, court documents, indictments, that sort of thing. But I may throw in a couple of nuggets, maybe a theory or two. Look, the old adage goes, once a gangster, always a gangster. So we're going to get into it. We're going to delve into it. We're going to start with the Windy City of Chicago. I was out in Chicago last year. Had a great time. I think it's a great city. And we all know that the Chicago outfit has been around for decades, 100+ years. The Chicago outfit, as far as organized crime, really started in the late 19th century. And by the 20s, as we know, the Chicago outfit was the premier organization in America, led by Al Capone. Today, though, it is a far different group. And look, Chicago is known around America at this point as one of the most dangerous cities in our country. And it's now dominated by, street gangs who are oversaw by drug cartels. And we have seen over the years that has continued to get worse and worse. Youth violence, that sort of thing. Now, for the last decade plus, the reputed head has always been Salvatore Sully De Laurentiis. However, at this point, I think it's a very strong possibility. And I believe Sully De Laurentiis is now retired. Look, do I think he maybe has a say or two in some things? Probably. Do I think he's getting some envelopes? Probably. But I think the street boss, the guy that's making the real decisions, is Albert Vina. Now, Albie Vina came up under Joey the Clown Lombardo up on Grand Avenue. And Albie is really kind of taken a main seat in this group for a couple of years now. This panel, right, the group that's at the top of the family in Chicago, guys like, Jimmy Marcello, Fat Mike Sarno, guys like that. I mean, they went to prison. Sully, luckily, really hasn't. But I think for him, he's really just, looking to live out the rest of his life. And Vina is a guy who, from what I understand, still convenes. He's still out there doing things. and he's still holding court up at Richards on Milwaukee Avenue. So I've kind of had him as this position. I think he's really been the street boss for, let's say, the last 5 years. Sully De Laurentiis is 85 years old, I believe. So it's probable that he's no longer on the street per se day to day. The reputed underboss of this family is Sammy Cards Cortadella. Now, Sammy Cards Cortadella is seen here with Fat Mike Sarno. Fat Mike Sarno is serving 25 years. And Sarno's kind of number two was always Cortadella. Now, Cortadella did some prison time in his life, but he's been pretty quiet. There's not a lot known about Salvatore Cortadella. He's a guy, though, that, again, has been able to kind of build his, kind of group over the years. If you know anything about Fat Mike Sarno, Sarno was from Cicero. Cortadella's kind of always held court with him out there. And they've always been a pretty powerful group out there in Cicero. So, you look at, Sarno, he actually served time in the 90s with guys like Rocco and Felice and Harry the Hook Allman in that big indictment in the early 90s. So Cortadella, he's done his time. He served his time, and he's come up under people. Remember, Fat Mike Sarno at one point was the boss of this family. Now that he's in prison, Cortadella, hierarchy position, makes sense. The number 3 is Pudgy Matassa, a.k.a. John Matassa Jr. This guy's interesting, John Matassa, because when you look at Matassa over the years, he's really been kind of the racketeer of these groups. Pudgy Matassa has been in all sorts of unions over the years. He held a lot of sway in the bus worker union over the years, and is a guy that on Rush Street coming up in Chicago was huge in the juice racket, juice loan business, which, again, if you know anything about the Frank Calabrese's of the world, Pudgy Matassas, they made a lot of money in juice loan operations. That's a big thing in Chicago. Matassa was last arrested or involved in an indictment in and around like 2017, 2018. This is a guy that's been around a long time. He's paid his dues. He actually came up under Joe the Builder Andriacci. And Joe the Builder is, a guy who literally was around the Chicago outfit in like the 60s. At one point, as I said, Matassa was I believe, the treasurer of the local 7-Eleven, which is the bus worker union. He's always had a lot of involvement in different unions, and is able to make a lot of money over the years in union racketeering. So I know when he was going to be sentenced in 2019 for some racketeering stuff, he had mentioned that he has major health problems due to his poor taking care of himself, as we see here. So, when we look at the Chicago outfit, is it, what it once was? Of course not. None of these groups are that we're going to talk about today. But I would say that the Chicago outfit probably has 30 to 50 members on the street currently. You're just kind of a compact group. They do their thing, and, they're pretty quiet. We see your occasional indictment from Chicago, but not much. Another really interesting city is Detroit. Obviously, the partnership over the years has been a strong group. We look at the history of this family. We have seen families just completely destroyed by informants, not the Detroit partnership. Only one known informant as a made member over the years. Pretty incredible. And what have we heard? The name's Toko, the Jack Alone name. Those people have been able to continue their lineages due to the fact that they have had 2 or 3 generations that are involved in organized crime. Now, again, we go with reputed boss, the guy at the top. It has been Jackie the Kid, Jack Alone, for a long period of time. And I want to make this clear. I never include the family members of these people. But I want to talk a little bit about Jack Alone, because, Jackie's kind of a sad story, if we're being honest. Look, Jack Alone he comes from an infamous family. He's been the reputed head of the mob in this city for a long time, but he also has had to deal with a lot of personal tragedy. He is not, to me, the street head of this family. I'll get into that in a second. But I want to talk a little bit about Jackie Jackalon's daughter, who can be seen here, a woman called Chantel. When you look at kind of the families of these people, we don't talk much about them because they don't have any bearing in what we're getting into. But, when we look at kind of personal things, it happens. I've heard of people that, have lost children. There's a guy in the Colombo crime family that lost all three of his children. Chantel Jackalone has, I believe, is brain dead after she suffered a peanut allergy, and she is in a really bad way. And you never hear again about the personal things that these people do. I know Jackie the kid and his wife had sued the ambulance company. They won a huge settlement, I think in the area of like $30 million. Jackie's had to go through a lot of personal tragedy. Look, does he have an infamous name in Detroit? Absolutely. But definitely a sad story. The street boss, as far as the person on the street today making the decisions, someone who I think works in conjunction with the boss of this family, and I think also acts as a consigliere, is Peter Tocco, a.k.a. Specs Tocco. Look, this is a compact family. There's not, a ton of members here. I think when we're looking at the large scale of these families, I think this is probably the smallest family as far as, along with Buffalo, as the smallest families, left in America. Now, obviously, Tocco's grandfather was Black Bill Tocco. Obviously, his extended family involved Jack Tocco. Tocco was the once boss of this family. So, again, continued lineage. His grandfather was Black Bill Tocco, right? We still see people from that family in this group today. The reputed underboss for a long period of time is Anthony Chicago, Tony LaPiana. Now, LaPiana has taken a very under the radar look into this life. This is the only known photo I have of LaPiana. He's actually a guy who came up in Chicago. He was really involved in looting pension funds over the years, union stuff. And he kind of made his way to Detroit to kind of create, his empire. And again, Detroit, very compact group, but strong, right? Make a lot of money. These people are rich. They're doing well. They have a lot of legit businesses in Detroit. You look at even some of the recent indictments, which we don't see much. But what are you seeing? Bookmaking operations, and we're talking about millions of dollars. There was an associate, a person called Gino Acetola, a couple of years ago. He was involved with a gigantic embezzlement credit card processing company indictment. So there's guys out there making money in this family. There's still people left, and there's guys that are kind of making their way. As far as known members, look, again, I don't ever want to say this because it's hard to quote. I would say on the street, made guys 20 to 30, probably, maybe less. Compact group, do their thing. Now, I will always say the dean of Detroit in this world, as far as the mob, is Scott Bernstein. So I would always venture to give his opinion over anything. But I think that's kind of a good look into this family. They're small, they're compact, but they're formidable. The city of Buffalo is next. And this is always an interesting city, right? The reputed head of this group for a long time has been Joseph Todaro Jr. And obviously, Joe Todaro's father, Lead Pipe Joe Sr., was the boss for years. And listen, Buffalo is a city that has had the Mafia in it, as far as, especially from Sicily, for over 100 years. I mean, in the early 1900s, the first known Mafia boss showed himself in Buffalo, a person called Angelo Palmieri. And by the early 20s, Steve Magaddino, aka Stefano Magaddino, started to kind of make his presence felt. And by the mid-20s, he was the boss of this family. And he would operate Magaddino in Buffalo for like 50 years. Remember, Magaddino became official boss of that family in 1922. He would lead until 1974-ish. It's a long time, 52 years. And this is when the Buffalo crime family was, look, Stefano Magaddino was important, very important, because again, he had a lot of connection to New York with his family members like Joe Bonanno, a lot of connection there. Buffalo with groups like Pittston, with Buffalino. But Joe Todaro Jr. has allegedly been the boss of this family since around 2006. Now, he will tell you that he is the head of a pizza empire in La Nova and that, everything's fine. We will talk about the Mafia. Now, many of you remember back in 2019, my old boss, Dave Portnoy, did a pizza review at La Nova, and Joe Todaro was in it. He took him through the restaurant. It was wild. It was the only known thing I've ever seen of its kind. And Joe Todaro, as recently as like 6 months ago, has done various, campaigns and, doing interviews with the media. We don't ever talk about that. That is one thing we don't. You want to get on Joey Molino, you got to get on Joe Todaro too. Joe Todaro has talked to various media. He did a pizza review with my old boss. So if you want to talk about Joey Molino, you got to talk about Joe Todaro. Do I believe he's still the head of the Buffalo crime family? Yes. The underboss of this group is alleged to be a person called Domenico Violi. Now, Domenico Violi, as far as I know, and I believe this was proven recently, Domenico Violi is from Canada. So he was, again, he's your only known non-American that is on the hierarchy of, a crime family. Now remember, his father was Paolo Violi. Now Paolo Violi was, very important in the Catroni crime family in Montreal many years ago. He died in 1978 from a gunshot wound. I believe he was like close to around like 50. And Domenico Violi is been reported as the underboss in this family for about 6 or 7 years. He was released from prison in 2021 after serving about 3 years. And he's not really been heard of much since then. The consigliere of this group is unknown to me. It was last Butchie Bifocal's Bafalco. Butchie died a couple of years ago. And as far as I know, there's been no known replacement. I guess we can conceivably think about who it could be. It could be Peter Garace Sr., who is Joe Todaro's father-in-law. I don't know. Donald the Turtle Panapinta. I have no idea. I know that, there are guys around. They're older guys. Obviously, if you look into, Joe Violi, Domenico's brother, and I know he's a reputed made member of this family. Rocco Lupino. I don't know. I can't answer that. Obviously, if people are in Buffalo, maybe they're hearing something that I'm not. Let me know in the comments. Maybe you have an idea. Again, this is not a great science. It's not like these groups get together every year as a board of directors meeting and say, hey, this is our consigliere and this is our underboss. There's no it's not like this is Pepsi or something, or McDonald's where they have a hierarchy of the leaders. So at the end of the day, though, Buffalo is interesting. It's another, again, keyword, compact group, small group. Look, Joe Todaro does not need to be in the mob, right? He makes a lot of money with his pizza franchise. But again, this is kind of ingrained in these people, and, that's that. Let's talk about New England, the patriarchal crime family, which, again, we have heard people say they don't believe this group's a family. I'm not ready to say that. They are definitely a family. They're definitely a group that have identified members at the top. And I think one thing that we have to know, and the key word with 2024 is acting or street boss, right? Because there's a lot of guys that are the de facto heads of these families, but there are people in the streets that are making, the day-to-day decisions, right? At least that's what we think. Guys like Vic Amuso, right? He's always going to be there in name only, but there are other people actually running the day-to-day operations on the street. Now, in the New England, Boston patriarchal regime, The de facto head of this family is Carmen D'Annunzio, aka the Cheese Man. Now he gets his nickname Cheese Man due to the fact that at one point Carmen D'Annunzio had a cheese shop on, I believe, Endicott Street in the North End called Fresh Cheese. He's had a lot of health problems over the years, obviously a large and rotund individual. We all know that at one point his brother, Anthony D'Annunzio, had a hierarchy role in this family, may still. And I will say this, and this is my own opinion. I believe his brother is the day-to-day person in this family on the street. That's just my opinion. It's a theory. I don't know that it's proven. However, we can take that it is possible due to the fact that when you look at this, and that's where I think when you're looking at foreshadowing or history, that's important when you're doing these things, because you have to kind of look at, okay, what do we know? Well, we do know that at one point, Anthony D'Annunzio was the acting boss of this family back in like the early 2010s. So I think that's entirely possible. The underboss is reputed to be Eddie Lado. Eddie comes out of Rhode Island, big in the Providence area. Eddie Lado is got I call it a record on this show of the most convictions I've ever seen from one mobster. Eddie Lado has been convicted, I believe, 20 times in court for crimes. He has been in prison a lot. And he is a guy who, just doesn't, you don't stop being a mobster because you go to prison. Eddie came up under Bobo Marapise in the 80s. And he was the main suspect in the 1992 murder of a person called Kevin Hanrahan. And that was identified through Bobby DeLuca and some of his testimony. If we sat here talking about how much he's been in prison, we would go crazy. He was last released from prison, I believe, in like 2019. And we learned that he was the possible underboss of this family in a affidavit from 2022, where he was identified as second in command. So obviously, there are a lot of factions in the Boston area, right? You have Rhode Island, you have parts of Connecticut, you have people up in Maine, you have people in some of the counties surrounding Massachusetts, like Norfolk County. I know Vinny the Animal Ferrara lives out there. You have East Boston, you have the North End, you have all sorts of different factions of this family. Definitely still around. The name that I look at from a consigliere standpoint, number 3, but I think he absolutely is probably also making some day-to-day decisions. We would be remiss if we didn't mention Spucky Spagnuolo. Spucky is a guy who, in my opinion, is one of the more interesting people that this family has. Spucky's a guy who at one point was acting boss. He took over the East Boston crew. Spucky is one of the main suspects in whacking Joe the Animal Barbosa out in San Francisco way back in the 70s. He came up under Biagio Di Giacomo, who operated in East Boston. Been around a while. Another guy big with video poker, vending machines, protection money, that sort of thing. He's done a lot of prison time over the years. Did prison time as much as recently for shaking down, video poker machine proceeds. Very old, in his 80s. But again, whether you look at Lado or Spagnuolo or even like the D'Annunzios, been around a long time. Leopard doesn't change its spots. By the way, shout out to the guy in my comments. I said the leopard doesn't change his stripes recently, and someone called me out for it. So I wanted to discuss that. But in this case, with the patriarchal crime family, a leopard doesn't change its spots. Let's just be honest. One interesting name, I mentioned Vinny the Animal, a guy who has claimed he's retired from the life. Is he? I don't know. I think he's a guy who could operate, way out in the counties of Boston, in the suburbs, and, we wouldn't hear much from him. Listen, being retired in the mob is an interesting kind of notion, right? Do I think anyone is truly retired and they just go and they live in Florida and that's that? No, I don't. I think all of the people, right? Sully, De Laurentiis, Joey Merlino, Vinny the Animal. Like, the word retired, I think, is cool to say, but you can't retire from the Mafia, right? Look, is it blood in, blood out? Yeah, kind of. I mean, basically, as the great Curtis Sliwa said at one point, he said that there's only two ways out of Cosa Nostra, and that's, go to prison or 6 feet in a pine box. That's the end. We've seen one or two people leave the life, as like John Jr., but you don't do that much. So before we get into the Philadelphia crime families and the 5 families, we got to talk about New Jersey. Before we do that, though, if you're enjoying this video, you're watching us live on a premiere, maybe you're watching us after, feel free to hit that super chat or super thanks icon. We greatly appreciate anybody that contributes further to our show. We feel like we have something great here, and it always is great to up it. I want to get to a point where I still don't pay a producer for this show. I try to. I'm just trying to earn a living here, though. So if anybody enjoys what we're doing, hit that super thanks icon if you're watching after the fact. If you're watching this live during the premiere, throw in a super chat. Any contribution is greatly appreciated. Let's get into New Jersey, the DeCavalcanti crime family. And, for a long time, the leader of this group, or the reputed leader, is this individual, a person called Charles Big Ears Missouri. Now, Missouri is, like many of the people we're talking about here, very old. He's been around a long time. His father, a person called Frank Missouri, goes back really to the beginnings of this family. It's so interesting looking at the, kind of the histories of these groups. When you look at Frank Missouri, who was Charles Big Ears Missouri's father, they called him Fat Frank. Fat Frank Missouri was the underboss of the DeCavalcanti crime family in the mid-50s, which is nuts, right? So that would make him, like, he was born in, like, I don't have his exact birth date, but I believe he was born in, like, the early 10s or, like, the late zeros. Crazy. It just shows you how long guys like this have been around. But his son became a made member, followed in his father's footsteps. And once John Riggi went to prison, he was established Big Ears as one of the ruling panels, alongside Vinny Ocean, guys like that. He went to prison, got out in the late 2000s, and he has kind of been in this role for a good amount of time. I would say, I would say around a decade, 8 to 10 years. And he has been very quiet. He's old, but again, a leopard don't change his spots. The underboss is a interesting, I think, thought. And I've talked to Scott. He identified Little Joe Giacobbe as the underboss of this family. Little Joe is about as, what can I say, about as little known as you can get. All we know about Little Joe Giacobbe is his father, Joe Sr., was in the mob. He was a DeCavalcanti crime family guy for years, was made back in 1977, and his son is said to have led in his father's footsteps. That said, when you look at charts in this family, he is not really even identified much higher than an associate. But we have seen some information that could validate that he is the UB in this family. Again, no photo available, which is pretty hard to imagine. The number 3 in this group is Frank Nigro. They call him Frankie the Goomba Nigro. Been identified as the consigliere for a while. He was essentially named as the number 3 many years ago. Been around a long time as well. And he was actually identified by another person, Charles Stango, as a guy who goes back like, 50, 60, 70 years. Not just him, his father, right? His family. At one point, Charles Stango would say, oh, he started this whole thing. It's been around a while now. See his uncle, the underboss of Consigliere since the beginning of time. They came right from Sicily to here. Okay, this proves he's the oldest crew in the country. They originated the 5 families, okay? And then at Stangos is at one point, and now we run under the fucking Gambinos. So Stango identified Nigro's family as, kind of some of the ruling people that New Jersey had, way back. Now, I'm not aware of who he's talking about. I don't know of who his family is. And maybe someone that is, a little bit more well-versed would know. Not that I'm not well-versed, but I wouldn't say this is at the top of my list as far as families that I know. But according to Stango, and Stango doesn't identify who it is, but he identifies that, Goomba, who Frank Nigro is known as, goes way back. So that's interesting to think about. So, yeah, a family that's small, again, another small thing here. My guess is, similar to like the Chicago or Detroit groups, I've always said, we've heard the DeCavalcantes referenced as the real Sopranos. And I know in history, that's kind of what we've been told by the media. But as someone who studies the Mafia and knows a lot about it, I was always belief that if you look at a lot of the real life people, they come across more to me as like the Lucchese faction of the of New Jersey, the Sopranos, not necessarily this family, but as David Chase said, the Sopranos was not about one particular insular group. It had several different groups, and the characters remain. So let's go to Philadelphia. Philadelphia. Who doesn't want to talk about Philly? And, again, as I say time and time again, this is not an exact science. And this is where the episode gets, what's the word? Controversial, let's say. But again, I know I'm not always going to make people happy. I just have to do my best as a professional. Look, I've talked about this many times. I lived in Philadelphia for years. I've had to deal with certain things because of living there. I know some of the families of these people. I just want to make this clear. I try to be respectful. I do. That said, we can't get away from what we know. Look, to me, your de facto head. Look, do I think he's making decisions on the street? No, I don't. I think he kind of just sits back and does what he does, as they say. To me, if you ask me who the official boss of this family is right now, I would say it's Skinny Joey Merlino. I think it's just by name only. Again, like Vic Amuso. Okay, but again, the leopard doesn't change its spots. Joey Merlino has been around the mob since he was a child, since he was a little kid. His father was a number 2 to Nicky Scarfo. His uncle was in the mob. All his friends, all their fathers were in the mob. Do I think he makes money on his pockets? Absolutely. Do I think he gets money from friends as a viable way to describe his income? I don't know. It seems a little obtuse to me. This is where it gets tough. But if you ask me, if I had $100 and there was a list of 10 people and you said, who do you think the boss of the Philadelphia crime family is officially? I would put it, and I would venture to say that Joey Merlino would be your favorite. Is it exact science? No. Now, one thing we do know, and this comes from Joey Merlino's mouth, is according to FBI documents, at a Christmas party for the Genovese crime family in and around 2016, 2015, Joey Merlino identified the street boss, the individual that makes the decisions on a day-to-day. It's not my words. I'm just reporting what has been already reported. He identified this individual, Michael Lancelotti, as this is your street boss of Philadelphia. Now, Mikey Lance is a guy who is like a ghost. He's never been arrested. You don't hear much from him. He lives comfortably, but not too ostentatiously. He has children, just enjoys his life and makes money. His name surfaced a couple of years ago. In fact, about 12, 15 years ago in that Operation High Roller out of the Borgata. There's some bookmaking stuff, but that's pretty much it. We don't hear much. He is a, very quiet guy, right? He ain't on, as far as I know, he's not on Instagram. He's not seen in photos with Peter Tuccio. This guy has been really quiet. But when you look at the history of Philadelphia coming up, when Joey was coming up, Michael was always in video footage, kind of following Joey, a bit of a bodyguard, if you will, and he's a guy who still lives in the neighborhood, he don't live in Packer Park. He lives in the neighborhood. He is still a guy who is very respected. A lot of people like, and he is trustworthy. Good guy from what I've heard. I don't know him personally. I know, some of his family. I'm not going to get into that, but pretty respected. And according to the government, that's what they tell us. Listen, here's what I'm going to say, and I've said this before about Philly. I think they're extremely close to being really not even something you call a family. I think they're a group of friends that have known each other for a long time, and the federal government identifies them as mobsters. Are there high-scale union projects going on in Philadelphia that the mob's involved with? No. Is there a lot of bookmaking to be done in Philadelphia? Look, I think there's a small little piece, but is there enough to feed people? No. And I'll tell you right now, I know loan sharking. Listen, I know folks that do that sort of thing, and they're not in that world. So that just goes to show you where that is. And to be fair, you can go to Philly Live, which is literally 3 minutes from the homes of some of these people, and you can bet legally. You're going to get paid. You don't got to worry about bullshit. Listen, South Philly, because look, I bet for a long time. I bet into some of these people, not the people we're talking about, but in South Philly, it's, there's a lot of treachery in that world, right? With people not paying or bettors not paying or whatever. So I think these guys are they're trying to do what they can to make money legitimately. And I think they're always going to live with the label of mobsters, right? I will tell you this. I think Skinny Joey Molina will make more money doing a podcast than he will on the street. At least at this point. Consigliere of this family, in 2020, the last known person was identified as JL, which, no one's stupid. We would know that is Joseph Legambi. That said, Joseph Legambi is in his 80s. You talk about comfortable life. Joe Legambi has a beautiful home in Packer Park. He has sons that do really well and are not in the life. He's got a home at the shore. He likes to sunbathe. We know that. He's an elder statesman. He's a guy who has a wildly interesting life. And I'll tell you right now, people always ask me, like, if you could speak to anybody right now, top of my list would be Joe Legambi. I mean, you talk what a life, right? And this is a guy who got a life sentence and on a technicality got out. I think is one of the more underrated people ever in this family. It's truth. Super respected. I remember when I lived in Philly, I had friends of mine. He would get jobs for, just a really great guy, as far as I know. And, I think he's just looking to live the rest of his life, and give something to his kids. He didn't want to die in prison, which about 10 years ago he was facing. He had, before he beat that case, he had the prospect of you're never getting out again, and I think you have to just look at him and say, cautionary tale. He ends up having a good life, all in all. So yeah, that's my thought. Who the concierge is, I don't know. Look, do I think Joe Legambi's consulted with? Probably. But again, about what? There's nothing going on in Philly, guys. And look, I know there are going to be people that will watch this and say, oh, they're really, listen, I'm not saying I know more than anyone, but look, I do this enough to know. I think all the families I've discussed so far, if in 10 years they were defunct, it wouldn't be surprising at all. I mean, we go back to New Jersey. There is not one made member in the New Jersey Cavalcanti crime family under the age of 60. In fact, there are more people over the ages of 70 than anything. They have family members that are 80, 90 years old. What do you got there? Not much. I think Philadelphia is a group of friends who have ventured mostly into legit businesses. because that's where the money is. There ain't no money in bookmaking and loan sharking anymore. And they are trying to survive. If they go to prison, it's hopefully a couple of years. They get hit with some crappy racketeering case. But, and I've said this too, I believe that they are not a point of contention anymore for the FBI. I think the FBI has moved on to bigger business. And unless they get one of these people to cooperate and give them a body or two, I don't think you're going to see any more indictments out of Philadelphia. I really don't. I think these guys, unless it is, obvious, where they do something stupid, that's the only way you see another case. These guys are super smart at this point and mostly into legit stuff. Let's get into the 5 families. This is all more well-known than a lot of the stuff we've talked about. We'll first talk about the Bonanno crime family. Reputed head, he's pretty much said he is Michael the Nose Mancuso. We know about him. Been around a long time. Did time in the 80s for allegedly whacking his wife. He's also currently in prison. One of the only bosses currently in prison. He will be released for a parole violation or supervised release violation. He'll be out in a couple of months, end of summer. He's cooling his heels at Allenwood. The number 2 in this group is his pal in the black, Johnny Joe Spirito. They've been friends for years, both from the Bronx. Both kind of came up together. This family is pretty much dominated by the Bronx now. You look at all the people that have hierarchy positions, messenger positions, Ernie Aiello, Johnny Joe Spirito Jr., Johnny Mulberry. A lot of these guys are either from Manhattan or based at one point in Manhattan, Harlem, and the Bronx. Now, Brooklyn was always kind of a well-represented faction. Guys like Johnny Skyway, Vinny TV, John Camerano Jr. We had Peter Lavaglio. He kind of talked about that. The number 3 position is really more interesting at this point. I, for a long time, thought it was Tommy DiFiore. Tommy D was, has always really been a respected member of this group. Gene Borello, I know, mentioned to me at one point when he was running around, he was the identified boss, Tommy DiFiore, in the late 2000s. And we know from history, Thomas DiFiore was the acting boss in like 2013, 2014. We saw a guy, Joe Bosch, was the boss at one point. Vinny TV was street boss. I don't think it's out of the question to think that Tommy DiFiore is the consigliere. He's pretty old, though. Recently, and Bernstein reported this, I also talked to someone else that said it's not crazy. I think in terms of, do I understand it? No, but again, the theme of this show, these guys, when they get out of prison, they don't just go and become like pro shop snack bar workers or like greeters at Walmart. They don't, go out and get a hedge fund position. These guys are mobsters. Scott Bernstein reported recently, I have heard some sourcing recently, that the number 3 is Bruno Indelicato in this family. Now, is it crazy? No. Bruno Indelicato has done a lot of time over the years, and I think feels like I've owed something, right? We do know that Bruno had a major connection to Vinny Gorgeous, who, again, remember, the Bronx. He was with Vinny Gorgeous, Dominic Sicali. We know that Mancuso's from the Bronx. It is conceivable to believe that once Bruno got out, look, again, he ain't going to go become a greeter at Walmart. I don't think that's crazy. Remember, Bruno Indelicato, his father was whacked in the 3 Capos hit. He was the trigger man in the Carmine Galanti hit. This is another guy. Again, never would speak to me, but could you imagine the stories this guy has? Just amazing. That's the saddest thing about the mob genre is how many guys will die and we'll never hear their stories. Insane. It's unlike any other group, right? And any other genre. A war hero tells the stories. Not that these people are war heroes. They're bad people. But it would be amazing to hear their stories, But then again, it would have been cool to hear Billy the Kid's story or Wyatt Earp. We've always been fascinated by villains. So, look, is it an exact science? No. And that's one thing that's very clear with doing these types of shows. The Colombo crime family will be a quick one. The current boss, allegedly, is a person called Little Robert D'Onofrio. Little Rob came up under Bill Cotolo in Brooklyn. As we know, with the Colombos, they are pretty much based in Brooklyn. That's where they are. This is the weakest of the five families. The Colombo crime family really has no one in, like when you look at the other boroughs, like they have a couple of people in Staten Island, guys like Joe Amato. I think Dennis DeLucia still operates. He's up in the Bronx. They don't have anyone in Queens, as far as I know. They don't have anybody in Harlem or really uptown or anything. No one really in Manhattan. This is a group that is Long Island and Brooklyn, right? Little Rob came up under Bill Cotolo, kind of moved around over the years. At one point was married to Big Ange, the member of Mob Wives. They had a few children. Their children are both grown now. Little Rob's respected. I think he's probably the best choice this group has made in a long time as far as boss. Who the number two is, it was last identified as Benji Castellazzo. I have some theories. My theory is that in tandem, I think Joey Amato is a higher up at this point. I don't have proof of that. It wouldn't surprise me, though. He's very close to D'Onofrio. He, according to him, runs Staten Island, and that's something he said on Wiretap. I think he's probably – look, Castellazzo is very old. I'm talking about one of the oldest known members of the Mafia in New York. He's doing prison time. Look, I haven't heard exactly gleaming things about Castellazzo. So I'm going to guess that he's retired in the truest sense. And I think this family is probably run by a grouping of D'Onofrio. Joe Amato might have some say. Is he identified as, an official? No, but we know he's a made guy and we know he's powerful according to his own voice. The last consigliere of this family was Ralphie Di Matteo. They have not named, as far as we know, an acting consigliere. It could be his brother, Luca Di Matteo, his older brother. Luca did some time, him and his grandson, Luki, they did some time for some stuff. Luca is identified as a made guy. We all know that Ralph got a kind of this interesting tag after he went on the run in that case in 2021. And his photo was here where he was in a pool with his wife. His own kid took the photo. Ralph took a plea. He's doing a couple of years inside. Look, it's possible that they don't have a number three. Vinny Unions, he was another powerful guy. He took a plea recently. This, again, is your weakest of families. Now, one thing that is interesting, when we look at history, Tommy Schatz, he recently got out. He was on a panel. He was on a hierarchy at one point, was the boss of this family at one point. What's his position? Remember, he spoke to bloggers and allegedly did a radio show when he was in prison. I don't know how that went over with the family. Also, Joe Waverly, where's he at in all this? He got out and did some prison time. He was also a hierarchy person at one point. They're kind of an influx group. Some are in prison. Teddy Persko, we know he's in prison. He recently said he doesn't want any part of the life, which that could just be something he said, but that's just what we know. Two more to go through here, and it is, three more. The Gambino crime family, the Genovese crime family, and the Lucchese crime family. To me, the three most interesting and powerful. And I will say this to the day it doesn't look true, the Gambino crime family, I think, alongside the Genovese, are about as strong of a mafia family in 2024 that we have. Gambinos still have a bunch of very powerful union racketeers, labor racketeers, construction people, money makers. The reputed head of this group is Lorenzo Menino, and that has been pretty much set for a while now. And I know a lot of people thought that Frankie Cali might be the boss or acting boss. I've heard that's not true whatsoever. He was definitely involved, but it was not the acting boss. We know that Dom Cephalou was as well. I think he's probably more in kind of an advisory role. He's pretty old at this point. And Lorenzo has been kind of in that position since 2019, so about 5 years now. The underboss. All right. This is where this show gets really interesting. I want to make this abundantly clear. We have a theory alert here. The last identified underboss of this family was Lorenzo Menino. We have heard all sorts of things about who the underboss or the number 2 in this group is. I want to make this very clear. We have no idea who the underboss right now. There's no one been identified. I'm just theorizing, kind of like some of you did with the Philly fire at the steak shop. It's a theory. But as I said, people don't go to prison for really long periods of time and come home and just disappear. They don't. They might, in the young world, the young circles, but certain guys with a certain G last name, 5 letters, they don't do 50-year sentences and come home and just, I understand there's parole, supervised release, that sort of thing. But I have a theory that a certain G name is a higher up. I have no proof. It's just a theory. And again, this is a made member of the Mafia. We know who he is. It's not like I'm putting it out there. Look, if he's living his life in anonymity, that could be true. But my thought is, and we know that this family has had, Peter Gotti took over this family. They've had a name. As far as I know, he does not speak to any other members of this family. He is on his own. He views a certain son in a bad way, because everybody does in the street. It's interesting. That's all I'm going to say. And notice I have not said this person's name, but I think you know who I'm talking about. Just a theory. My thought is he probably thinks he has something coming to him. So if it's not him, it could be Monk Sassano. It could be, I don't know. I have no idea. All those guys are Queens people. But remember, Gene Gotti was made before John. You don't think he's Cosa Nostra? The number 3 was identified several years ago as Michael Mickey Boy Paradiso, another longtime member of the Gambino family, came up in Canarsie, came up under Olympia Garofalo, was involved at times with the Bergen crew, knew John Gotti since they were kids. In fact, in the 80s, Gotti mentioned Paradiso as a successor to Lilo Garofalo and guys like George Remini. So Paradiso is respected. Sicilians like him. But remember, there's a lot of powerful people in this family still. Nicky Carrazzo, Top Tomato Sciandra, Lenny Di Maria, Campos, Sonny Giuliano, who the hell else? All sorts of different people. Bo Filippelli. There's a lot of powerful guys still. Frankie Camuso. There's a lot of people really powerful still in this group. Let's go to the Genovese crime family. Another, I think, easier said than done. Dominic Sicali has been mentioned that he was going to identify the real boss of this family for a while. I don't believe he would even know. How would he know? To me, there's no question. The boss of this family, to me, is and always will be until he doesn't want it anymore, Barney Bellomo. Understand, Barney Bellomo was handpicked by Chin Gigante to be the boss of this family. Handpicked. The underboss, I still believe, is Michael Ragusa, another very low-key guy. There's 1 or 2 photos of him out there. He's a Harlem guy, got busted for the ILA stuff in the early 2000s, came up, 116th Street group, close to Bellomo. If it's not him, I think he's definitely involved in day-to-day things. He's still around, still doing things like a ghost. The number 3 is interesting because Hippie Zanfardino was recently given capo of the 116th Street crew, which would mean possibly that Uncle Patty Falchetti was up to consigliere of this family. And that would make sense due to the fact that Falchetti was and is a member of the 116th Street crew, came up with Colombo, came up with Muscarella, came up with, all those guys. And again, East Harlem runs tandem with the Bronx, Uptown, Pleasant Avenue, Tony Salerno. Remember, 116th Street crew goes back to the days of the beginning of the Mafia in the New York area. They're probably the strongest crew in the history of the Mafia. Patsy Perello, he could have a role. I think he's just more of an elder statesman out of the Bronx. I know Danny Pagano has been talked that he's in the hierarchy. I don't buy it. I think the hierarchy is Harlem people. Muscarella, he's probably involved as well at some level, another elder statesman. Let's go to the last family. I don't want to be on here for more than an hour. The Lucchese crime family is our final group. And they are very interesting, too, because for a long time, we've heard the name Big Mike DeSantis, who I believe is your day-to-day street boss. I think the de facto head of this family is Vicamuso. That will not change until Vicamuso dies. Does Vicamuso have anything in this family on the street? No, I don't. Do I think he maybe gets some commissary money from people to be quiet and shut up and live a decent life in prison? Absolutely. I'm sure he's fine. And people love him in prison. I got this photo from a guy that I know who's inside with Vic, and he said Vic is a legend in prison and still kicking. He's never getting out. Very violent guy. Ordered a lot of murders. He ain't getting out. But I think he is your name boss only, right? It's always going to be Vicamuso until he dies. He was handpicked, Mike DeSantis, to run the family. But I've heard recently he is looking to retire. And the person that will enter as your street boss is allegedly Georgie Nexapola. Georgie Nex, young still. He's a Brooklyn guy, which takes on the Lucchese name. For a while, this family was based in the Bronx with people like Stephen Crea, Harlem, Matty Madonna. Not anymore. The power vacuum is back, and the Bronx is essentially the power cycle now. Georgie Neck is a guy that did about 20 years in prison, very respected, and is said to have taken on the mantle that will be his once DeSantis is kind of semi-retired. The underboss is allegedly Frankie Bones Papani. Papani is a longtime pal of Zapola. Papani came up in Brooklyn in the old Vario crew. Also a guy that did prison time. Frank Papani actually was ratted on by his cousin, a person called Frank Gioa Jr. We did a video on him, which can be seen here. I'll link that in, I think. Another longtime member, respected. The number 3 is said to be Bawat Barada, who's still kicking. Bawat's based out of Harlem, the Bronx. Again, elder statesman. That's generally what a consigliere is. Came up under Anthony Casso. Also did a long time in prison and is said to be kind of involved with the hierarchy. Now, we got a view of the hierarchy in a photo taken about 5 to 7 years ago in a park in New York where you saw Zapola, other members of the family that were kind of in there. Now, Panisi reported recently, according to what he knows, that De La Russa's out and DeSimone are out. Now, DeSimone was a Bronx guy. He's out. And De La Russa was a Brooklyn guy under DeSantis. He's out. So, again, none of this is an exact science, but I tried my best. I hope you enjoyed. This is always a fun episode to do. It's always a very interesting thing to do. The Mafia is not what it once was. In the criminal pecking order, they're not very high, but they're still around in places, like Staten Island and certain parts of Brooklyn and certain parts of Chicago and Detroit. So yeah, that's that. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're listening, make sure you leave us a detailed review, rating, comment, hit the like button. If you want to send a donation through the super thanks button, please do it. This has been episode 162 of the Sit Down, and we'll see you next week here on the show.